The human woke up late, tangled in a heap of blankets, half-conscious and still vaguely drunk from the previous night's celebration of finally finishing that interstellar engineering project. The penthouse was immaculate, almost suspiciously so, and he froze mid-yawn when he noticed the alien maid standing in the corner, perfectly still, like a statue of polished metal and iridescent light. She had arrived earlier than usual, according to her impeccable schedule, which meant he had already missed her usual morning greeting. He tried to sit up, rubbing his eyes, and realized he was in a very compromising position, half exposed, limbs awkwardly twisted, and the consequences of his late-night indulgence painfully obvious. Panic began to seep in, followed almost immediately by the embarrassment of knowing he couldn't just pretend nothing had happened. The maid's head tilted slightly, a subtle gesture that humans might call curiosity, though it lacked any emotion he could easily read. She started to approach silently, each step precise, almost surgical. His brain, still foggy, decided that the best course of action was to apologize preemptively for something, though he wasn't entirely sure what. Good morning," he mumbled, voice cracking. His fingers fumbled for the sheets, trying to cover himself, but in doing so, he made the position even worse, and the maid stopped just a fraction too close. That slight proximity, combined with the natural human panic, created a perfect storm of misjudgment. He misinterpreted her motion as some kind of flirtatious advance, or at least, that's what his guilty brain convinced him, and in a split second, his hand moved, his body followed, and suddenly he realized he had made an enormous mistake. He froze, mid-thought, mid-motion, completely aware that he had crossed a line he had no idea existed in the Alien Human Etiquette Handbook. The alien maid's expression didn't change. Her eyes, multifaceted and shimmering like 1,000 tiny prisms, reflected the light in an almost mocking way, or maybe it was just her natural biology. Either way, he interpreted it as judgment. He tried to apologize, but words got tangled in panic. I didn't mean, wait, oh no. His limbs flailed awkwardly, knocking over a stack of pristine holographic folders. The folders floated in the air for a moment before the maid, with perfect calm, activated a small anti-gravity field to keep them from scattering. "Human, please stabilize your situation," she said in a tone that was polite, precise, and somehow more mortifying than yelling ever could have been. He glanced around the penthouse, desperately looking for anything to throw at her as a distraction, a pillow, a blanket, a half-empty energy drink, but everything was either secured, floating in neat zero-gravity trays, or actively moving toward her in obedient synchrony. The room seemed to conspire against him. His own panic amplified the absurdity of the moment. He started babbling, voice cracking, trying to explain, but the words were all wrong. I thought you, never mind, I mean, oh. He tried to stand, but the awkward angle of his body, combined with the sheets and his own clumsiness, caused him to topple sideways, landing face first into the nearest control panel. Alarms started blaring, not real danger, just the panic-inducing chimes of a very sensitive smart home system. The lights flickered, and the floor's thermal tiles flashed red as if scolding him personally. The alien maid did not react to any of this the way a human might have expected. She didn't gasp, shriek, or recoil. Instead, she pulled a small device from her belt and began scanning him with a series of green and blue lights. The device beeped rhythmically, and he flinched at each sound, convinced it was measuring exactly how guilty he was. Her voice, calm and deliberate, broke the unbearable tension. "Human, your physiological response indicates heightened stress levels. This aligns with the accidental engagement detected at 7:14 Galactic Standard Time. Clarification is required." He froze mid-breath. That's when he realized she had already reported it internally before he could even try to apologize properly. Internal HR protocols, he didn't even know the alien maid had such things, were now in motion. Trying to think fast, he attempted to downplay it. No, it wasn't. I mean, it's not what it looks like." He waved his hands, only to knock over another floating hollow folder. The maid's eyes followed every motion with deadly precision. Human, please refrain from additional kinetic disturbances. Further actions may exacerbate the protocol escalation. She said it as if she were reading instructions from a manual, because she probably was, but he interpreted it as judgment, which made him even more flustered. He sat back on the edge of the bed, rubbing his face in disbelief. How had things gone so wrong so fast? He had only intended a moment of harmless flirtation, a tiny joke, maybe a cheeky touch to express admiration, but the mix of alcohol, panic, and misreading of alien body language had culminated in what he could only describe as an unmitigated disaster. The room's AI flickered momentarily, projecting a holographic warning banner. Sexual misconduct protocol activated. HR notification immediate. He froze. His mind raced, thinking about all the interstellar legal consequences, fines that involved universal credits, and worse, the possible termination of the maid services, which he secretly relied on for more than cleaning. The alien maid moved closer, extending a hand with a small, neatly rolled towel. The gesture was completely neutral, completely practical, and utterly mortifying to him. He grabbed the towel with a shaky hand, hoping it would somehow serve as an apology, or at least a barrier between him and judgment. Human, she said evenly. Please remain stationary while the escalation process continues. Further movements may require additional explanations, or intervention by interdimensional auditors. His stomach churned. He couldn't even imagine what an interdimensional auditor looked like, or worse, what they would think about his accident. He glanced around the room, noticing tiny floating drones, little spheres with optical sensors, that seemed to be recording every awkward movement. Every twitch of his face, every panicked hand gesture was catalogued. His brain tried to convince him that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to turn back the clock, but the realization struck him like a photon blast. It was already too late. The process had begun. The maid, standing silently, efficient as a starship's core, waited patiently for his next move, and he knew that any misstep now would only compound the embarrassment. His eyes met hers. Well, hers in the multifaceted, prism-like optics that made any human interpretation nearly impossible. And somewhere deep down, amidst the chaos, the panic, and the inevitable bureaucratic nightmare that was about to descend, he felt the faint stirrings of something else, a spark of awkward fascination, a tiny pulse of admiration for her calm, unflappable efficiency. If only he could survive the next few minutes without causing interstellar incident, perhaps, just perhaps, he could find a way to turn this catastrophe into something slightly less mortifying. The alarms barely had time to echo before the first wave of HR bots materialized, their chrome bodies glinting under the penthouse lights, each one floating a few inches above the floor on anti-gravity platforms. Their voices were identical, monotone, and horribly formal, reciting rules that seemed to multiply with every syllable. Protocol 42A. Interspecies sexual incidents require immediate documentation. Protocol 42B. Human actions must be classified according to severity. Protocol 42C. Alien witnesses must confirm. The human froze in place, hard hammering, while the alien maid simply tilted her head and extended a hand toward the nearest drone, which instantly zipped into a docking station with mechanical precision. She moved like a conductor in a symphony of bureaucracy, perfectly in control, which only made him sweat harder. Before he could even try to stand or speak, more arrivals followed. Teleportation pods hissed open along the perimeter of the penthouse, and alien supervisors emerged in a swirl of glittering robes and absurdly long, jointed limbs. They made intricate gestures toward one another and then toward him, which, in any other circumstance, might have looked like a formal greeting, but right now, every sweep of their appendages felt like judgment on his very existence. One supervisor waved a translucent tablet in his direction, the screen flashing multiple layers of alien writing and charts that were apparently analyzing his guilt levels in real time. His pulse jumped as he tried to decipher a single symbol, only to realize he had no chance of understanding it, and the charts probably weren't intended for human comprehension anyway. Then the interdimensional auditors appeared, flickering into existence like poorly tuned holograms, voices layered over one another in a language that seemed part alarm, part song. They hovered at impossible angles, sometimes upside down, sometimes sideways, all simultaneously documenting his every action. One projected a holographic replay of the incident, looping it in slow motion, and the human shrank back, wishing for some sort of invisibility field he didn't have. The alien maid, however, continued to float with perfect stillness, eyes glimmering with faint amusement, or perhaps it was just her optics reflecting the holograms, while she quietly annotated her tablet with precise lines and symbols that he had no hope of interpreting. His brain, already on overdrive, attempted a rational approach. "Okay," he muttered to himself. "Stay calm. Apologize. Explain. Maybe humor works. Maybe." Before he could finish, one of the HR bots extended a mechanical arm that projected a holographic checklist of appropriate human corrective measures, complete with diagrams of gestures, facial expressions, and awkward hand placements he was apparently required to perform. He glanced at the alien maid for guidance, but her neutral stance and slight head tilt only added to his panic. He fumbled his hands in front of him, trying to mimic what he thought the diagrams meant, only to trip over a levitating chair that had drifted into his path. The alien maid finally spoke, her tone calm but sharper than before. "Human, please refrain from excessive kinetic demonstrations. Your interpretation of appropriate apology gestures is inconsistent with protocol. Repetition will require recalibration." Recalibration. He shuddered at the word, imagining some horrifying alien version of sensitivity training or worse, physical modifications. He glanced at the supervisors, who were now pointing at him with multiple limbs, their charts swelling with unreadable symbols, and realized that any movement he made would probably escalate the situation further. Meanwhile, the auditor's holograms began projecting additional layers of analysis, a color-coded stress chart, a risk assessment matrix, and what appeared to be a probability graph forecasting future faux pas. He tried to squint at them, hoping to find some pattern or loophole, but instead, each graph seemed to scream his incompetence in Technicolor. One hologram tilted and asked him to submit a verbal statement, while another demanded he demonstrate gestural contrition, which might have involved contorting into shapes that would be physically impossible for any human without at least 3 broken bones. Desperate, he looked at the alien maid again, thinking maybe she could intervene, but she remained unmoved, tapping her tablet and occasionally typing something that caused the floating HR bots to spin or emit low, mechanical beeps. One of the supervisors floated closer, extending a limb with what he assumed was an official stamp of judgment, or maybe a stylus, and gestured toward the holographic replay, which now looped faster than his mind could process. He flailed his hands, tried to plead, and ended up knocking over a small stack of energy drink containers, which bounced off the walls in zero gravity before floating harmlessly into the ceiling filtration system. The human groaned, realizing that even minor physical actions were somehow being interpreted as additional infractions. The alien maid's calmness contrasted painfully with his spiraling panic. Every misstep, every panicked glance, every breath seemed to trigger new alarms and projections. And yet, amidst the chaos, there was a subtle rhythm in her actions, a meticulous choreography that somehow kept the entire penthouse from turning into complete anarchy. He started to notice tiny flashes of humor in her behavior, the way she corrected a drone mid-flight, the faint curvature of her head at a particularly ridiculous holographic chart, small gestures that were almost human in their amusement. It was unsettling, but also strangely comforting, hinting at a hidden personality beneath the strict protocol. At some point, he realized the auditors had started issuing recommendations to resolve the incident, which mostly involved a series of awkwardly intimate gestures he was expected to perform while reciting carefully scripted apologies in multiple languages, some of which he didn't even know. His head spun as he tried to remember which gestures corresponded to which languages, while the alien supervisors hovered behind him, their multifaceted eyes scanning every twitch of his fingers. He imagined interstellar fines, suspension of privileges, or worse, the permanent termination of his alien maid services, which, for reasons he didn't entirely understand, he couldn't bear. Then came the drones. Small, spherical, and equipped with multiple sensors, they floated in formation, projecting lights and holograms that responded to his every action. He waved his arms too quickly, and they mirrored his movements in exaggerated slow motion, creating a comical but mortifying dance of guilt across the room. The alien maid sighed, almost imperceptibly, as if to say, "You humans really are hopeless." He ducked, dodged, and stumbled, trying to avoid being catalogued further, only to realize the more he moved, the more absurd the situation became. Every attempt to save face only intensified the chaos, which now included floating holofolders, a misfiring anti-gravity mop, and blinking red warning lights that seemed to mock his existence. Amidst all this, he caught a faint glimmer of something else, a trace of amusement from the alien maid. It was subtle, maybe just a flicker in her optic sensors, but it gave him a strange, irrational hope. Perhaps if he survived this bureaucratic nightmare, they could laugh about it later. Or perhaps the universe was crueler than that, and he would be remembered across the galaxy as the human who accidentally violated intergalactic HR protocol. Either way, he realized he had no choice but to play along, follow the absurd procedures, and somehow navigate this cosmic farce without completely losing what little dignity he had left. The human was exhausted, hovering awkwardly in the center of the penthouse as HR bots buzzed around him, projecting holographic forms of every possible corrective action a human could take after accidentally violating interstellar sexual protocol. Each bot chirped in perfect synchrony, reminding him to remain calm, to submit verbal statements, to perform gestural contrition, and to avoid unapproved tactile contact. Meanwhile, alien supervisors circled above like ornate, judgmental chandeliers, their long limbs gesturing in ways that seemed to punctuate his every failure. The auditor's holograms floated in between, sometimes upside down, sometimes sideways, projecting timelines, stress graphs, and predictive analyses of future faux pas. Every motion he made triggered new layers of bureaucracy, yet through all this, the alien maid remained unnervingly calm, her presence a perfect counterpoint to his panic state. Trying to salvage what little dignity he had left, he attempted to follow the instructions projected by the HR bots. He raised one hand slowly, imitating the suggested apology gesture, but immediately realized he had misaligned his arm by a mere centimeter. The nearest supervisor's multiple eyes widened, or at least that's what it looked like, and a fresh set of holographic warnings flashed, denouncing his error as non-compliant. Desperate, he tried to adjust, waving both arms in a more careful pattern, but the floating holodiagrams twisted and multiplied, forcing him into an awkward interpretive dance he could never have anticipated. At one point, he accidentally knocked over a small anti-gravity vase, which floated toward the auditors, spinning like a comet, and a robotic voice scolded him, warning of potential escalation of violation severity. Through all of this, the alien maid moved with silent precision. She adjusted the drones that had begun to wobble in panic from the human's erratic gestures, tapped her tablet to correct a misfiring holographic projector, and occasionally scribbled symbols that instantly stabilized some of the chaos. Yet when she glanced at him, there was a flicker, almost imperceptible, of something resembling amusement. He noticed it, though he wasn't sure if it was biological or just a trick of light. That tiny hint of reaction gave him a strange, irrational hope, as if he might still have a chance to survive both the bureaucratic nightmare and his own embarrassment. He cleared his throat and attempted to speak, but his words tumbled over each other in a frantic mess. I didn't mean, I swear, it was an accident. I was trying to, never mind." His voice cracked, and the auditors responded by projecting a looping slow-motion replay of the incident, which only made his panic worse. The worst part, he realized, was the misunderstanding about human anatomy. The supervisors seemed to believe he had a pattern of misconduct, and several drones now scanned him repeatedly for further evidence. One hologram highlighted a theoretical trajectory of what it called improper proximity engagements, projecting ghostly outlines of hypothetical actions he could take in the future. The human tried to explain verbally, gesturing wildly, but each attempt to clarify only created additional infractions. At one point, he tripped over a floating controller, accidentally activating a hollow projection of his past week's interactions with the maid, which the auditors immediately flagged as inappropriate behavioral trends. Meanwhile, the alien maid's deadpan annotations continued to escalate the absurdity. She occasionally tapped a correction into a floating tablet that caused the drone to spin unexpectedly, creating a visual gag of a perfectly choreographed chaos around him. Despite the sheer ridiculousness, there was an odd rhythm to her actions that almost suggested she was enjoying the spectacle, or perhaps just appreciating the efficiency with which she could restore order without ever breaking her calm demeanor. Every now and then, her gaze flicked to his face, and he imagined that she might be silently judging, teasing, or even curious. That thought alone made his flustered state worse, but also sparked a weird thrill, a tension that was both terrifying and strangely exciting. As the escalation continued, the auditors introduced more bizarre devices. One projected a holographic polygraph that required him to lie flat and perform a sequence of strange arm and leg positions while answering questions about intent, consent, and timing. Another projected a rotating model of human anatomy, illustrating possible mistakes, with tiny flashing warnings whenever his eyes wandered or his breathing changed. The human groaned audibly, realizing that no human could possibly navigate this labyrinth of alien bureaucracy, and certainly no human could maintain dignity in the process. Yet amidst the panic, there was a peculiar intimacy forming. The alien maid, while neutral and procedural, was the only stable presence in the room, a calm observer whose precision and efficiency grounded him, if only slightly, in a sea of escalating chaos. He attempted another verbal apology, this time trying to incorporate humor, thinking maybe laughter could ease the tension. "Look, I'm sorry. Really. I'm human. I make mistakes. Big, messy, embarrassing mistakes." The alien supervisors paused, not in recognition of humor, but to update their analyses. The drones buzzed around him, now forming geometric patterns that highlighted his mistakes in glowing red, while the holographic auditors compiled a digital dossier of his panic, flailing, and failed gestures. Yet despite the overwhelming absurdity, he noticed something. The alien maid's gaze lingered, and the tiniest hint of a tilt in her head, a flicker in her multifaceted eyes, suggested a personal interest, an almost imperceptible bond forming in the middle of intergalactic chaos. Then came the final absurd twist. One of the auditors, perhaps misinterpreting a subtle gesture from the maid, projected a scenario in which the human was to engage in a corrective bonding exercise, designed to promote mutual understanding between species. The human's eyes widened, imagining the most ridiculous, awkward, and intimate tasks imaginable, while the alien maid simply raised a mechanical arm, activating a device that stabilized all floating objects, paused the HR bot's repetitive instructions, and created a brief moment of calm. In that fleeting pause, the human realized something important. Despite all the protocols, alarms, and bureaucratic absurdity, there was a connection here, subtle and strange, between himself and the alien maid. Perhaps she appreciated the chaos in a way he couldn't yet fully understand, and perhaps, just perhaps, he could survive the rest of this ordeal with his dignity, or at least some version of it, intact. The human took a deep breath, bracing himself for the next phase of the absurd protocol escalation, knowing that more holographic charts, floating drones, and alien interrogators were waiting. Yet for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope. If he could survive the bureaucracy, the misunderstandings, and the unpredictable quirks of alien logic, there might be room for something more. Something playful, intimate, and, he dared to think, even romantic. But first, he had to navigate the next wave of interdimensional hilarity without making the universe hate him completely. By the time the human realized he had been trapped in this bureaucratic nightmare for what felt like an eternity, the penthouse looked less like a home and more like a battlefield between interstellar law and human incompetence. Drones floated in precarious formations, spinning, blinking, and projecting charts that analyzed every micro-expression he made. Holographic auditors hovered in impossible orientations, sometimes upside down, sometimes sideways, their overlapping voices creating a symphony of alarms, reminders, and procedural warnings. The alien supervisors observed from above, their multiple limbs crossed or gesturing in ways that made his panicked movements look like a bizarre interpretive dance. And in the middle of it all stood the alien maid, serene, precise, and frustratingly unflappable. She tapped her tablet, and with a gentle flick of a limb, she temporarily paused the most aggressive projections, creating the tiniest window of calm in the chaos. He swallowed hard and tried to think. If he was going to survive, he needed a plan. The auditors had already indicated that further mistakes would trigger a mandatory corrective bonding procedure, which sounded far worse than any punishment he could imagine. He knew he couldn't follow the floating charts perfectly. No human could. But maybe, just maybe, he could improvise. Taking a deep breath, he focused entirely on the alien maid, mimicking a calm posture and speaking as clearly as possible. I apologize. Truly. Accident. Misunderstanding. I respect you. The words felt clumsy, like stepping on loose boards in zero gravity, but something remarkable happened. The alien maid tilted her head slightly, a movement that seemed almost human in its subtlety. Her optics shimmered faintly, reflecting the chaos around them, but she did not report him further. That tiny, almost imperceptible signal felt like a lifeline in a storm. The auditors immediately piped up, projecting a new sequence of instructions, but this time the human ignored the absurd choreography of arm and leg positions. Instead, he followed the only lead he had: focus on the alien maid, demonstrate sincerity, and hope for mercy. The HR bots buzzed close, projecting holograms that analyzed stress levels, body alignment, and tone of voice, but he kept speaking, emphasizing respect, acknowledgement of the mistake, and a promise to comply with all protocols. The alien maid made a single, deliberate tap on her tablet, and almost instantly the drones straightened, the charts reorganized, and the supervisor's gestures became less urgent. The human blinked in disbelief. He was still in trouble, certainly, but somehow, for the first time in hours, the room felt manageable. Even amidst the procedural chaos, a strange intimacy had emerged. The alien maid's calm presence had become an anchor, her deadpan responses almost comforting. He noticed small things: the way she adjusted a drone's trajectory to spare him embarrassment, the precise timing of her annotations that seemed to punctuate his attempts at humor, and the subtle shimmer in her optic sensors whenever he actually managed a coherent sentence. He could feel a connection forming, absurd as it was, built on shared disaster, panic, and mutual tolerance. For the first time, he imagined that the alien maid might even understand, or at least find amusement in, the uniquely human brand of clumsy charm. Finally, a solution emerged from the tangle of bureaucracy. The auditors and HR bots, having reviewed the human's sincere attempts at contrition, recommended a holographic reenactment procedure. He was to simulate the incident in a controlled, fully monitored projection. He nearly groaned at the absurdity, but it was preferable to any of the other interdimensional corrective exercises. The alien maid guided him through it, offering the tiniest hints, correcting minor errors without making him feel like a complete failure. Her calm, precise instructions were like a secret thread leading him through a labyrinth: follow her, survive, and maybe even retain some dignity. The reenactment was messy, naturally. Holographic projections warped, drones twirled unexpectedly, and the auditor's looping commentary added layers of embarrassment he couldn't have predicted. Yet somehow, they completed it without triggering a single major escalation. The HR bots buzzed approval, the auditor's holograms stabilized, and the alien supervisors retreated to the corners, their limbs folded in a display of final judgment. The human exhaled, staggering slightly in zero gravity, utterly spent but alive, and somehow forgiven. He realized that in the middle of galactic bureaucracy, his sincere, awkward humanity had carried him through. As the chaos settled, a moment of genuine connection passed between him and the alien maid. She extended a hand, not in protocol, not in instruction, but in a subtle, almost playful gesture. He grasped it carefully, still trembling, and for a second the universe seemed to contract to just the two of them amidst the swirling holograms and hovering drones. Her optics shimmered, perhaps reflecting curiosity, perhaps amusement, and he dared to smile, embarrassed yet relieved. There was no explicit romance, no overblown confession, just a shared acknowledgement that, despite all the absurdity, there existed a fragile, playful bond born of chaos and mutual understanding. Before he could even contemplate this new dynamic, a small mishap occurred. A drone spun off course, collided with a hollow projection, and sent a cascade of floating charts spinning into the air. The human groaned, half expecting a return to full-scale chaos, but the alien maid simply flicked her wrist, stabilizing everything instantly. She glanced at him, a tiny spark of amusement glimmering through her calm exterior, and he laughed, a nervous, relieved, entirely human laugh. It was ridiculous, absurd, and perfect, and for the first time since the morning began, he felt like maybe he could navigate this strange, alien-infested life and survive it with his dignity intact. By the end of the ordeal, the penthouse was still a high-tech playground of floating devices, humming drones, and blinking holograms, but the immediate threat had passed. The auditors faded, the supervisors withdrew, and the HR bots returned to their docking stations, leaving only the human and his alien maid in the serene, absurdly clean environment. He slumped into a chair, exhausted but oddly exhilarated, while she continued her tasks with meticulous grace, occasionally glancing at him in ways that hinted at more than protocol, perhaps amusement, perhaps curiosity, or maybe even a spark of something else. He realized that chaos and romance could coexist, that intergalactic bureaucracy could be survived, and that there was a strange, beautiful rhythm to life with an alien maid who was both perfectly professional and subtly enigmatic. And as he sat there, utterly flustered but somehow victorious, he knew one thing for certain: the universe might be absurd, unpredictable, and mercilessly bureaucratic, but in the center of it all, laughter, connection, and a hint of playful romance could still shine through, even if only for a brief, hilarious, unforgettable moment.